It's Bill Wilson from Wilson's Fine Woodworking. Welcome to another edition. Today we're going to be talking about the bandsaw, and more particularly, how to make it track properly, which is one of the biggest problems with any bandsaw. Firstly, you have to take the tension off your blade every time you're not going to use it anymore. And I'm going to turn it back on here on mine by moving this lever. On yours, it might be slightly different. I have made up a little something to remind me that the tension is off or on the bandsaw. Here you can see I've taken a little hitch pin, put a piece of tape on it, written tension on it, and it's gone in a hole that will prevent the bandsaw from starting. Now that I've put the tension on, I can take this off. If I were to be all done, I would put this back, wait till the bandsaw blade becomes stationary, and then take the tension off. Be sure to read and understand all the instructions that come with your manual about operating your bandsaw. Okay, and remember to follow these safety rules and to wear safety glasses, because even though it's a bandsaw, you can still have pieces break off and come at you. You may, if you are doing things like resawing and you have a dust removal system on, may also wish to wear hearing protection, and it's a good idea. Bandsaws were designed to cut thick material quickly. If you're doing very thin material, you're probably better off using a scroll saw. Not only will it give you a better finish, you probably may not even have to sand the edge, whereas on the bandsaw, it's always rough. On my particular bandsaw, those are the largest and the smallest blades that I use. You can get smaller than 1/4 inch for mine, but I don't like to use them. And you can see from this 1-inch blade, it's also on the smaller one, but it's very evident here, you can see the discoloration at the teeth. They have been hardened, tempered, and the steel itself is hard backed, so it's very inflexible to twist. And this is the difference between a cheap blade and a very good blade, and that's usually the biggest problem of most bandsaw in operation. If you buy a cheap blade, you can twist the blade, even a 6-inch piece in your hand. One of these, you can't even move it. All right, I have the upper drive wheel door open here, and you can see the drive wheel. Mine happens to be cast iron. They're better than aluminum because they don't warp as easily. And you can see the tire that I'm touching here. Now, the surface of your tires have to be clean. If they are not, you're going to have troubles. It will not run smoothly. It may even slip. You can clean them with Bandsaw by hand. You can even soak it a little bit with a paper towel or something and rub it around. Blade is off, of course. After you use the Bandsaw, you must use methyl hydrate to re-clean the tires, because you don't want the Bandsaw to stay there. It may start to affect the rubber. You can see the blade is installed. And when you install the blade, of course, the tensioner is completely backed off, so you have lots of slack. And you should wear gloves, because the edges of the blade can really cut into your hand if you're not careful. When setting up the adjustments for your bandsaw, you have to have the upper and lower adjustment backed off. So here I have one set screw here, and I can back the whole thing away. Now my blade is completely clear and is not touching anything. While I'm doing this, I want to show that one of the problems you have with all these set screws, and I have 9 of them on mine, and you may have had this trouble yourself, when you go to do fine adjustments, just move it a millimeter or so. You back the set screw off, you go to put it back on, and it goes right back where it was. Here is the reason why. The set screws, most of them, look like this. There is a cup which makes a very sharp edge. There it is there. And you have to get rid of that sharp edge. You can take the screw to a grinder. I would suggest you find an appropriate threaded nut to put on there first so you can back it out and so you have a nice clean thread afterwards. This is how it's done. You can see there's the nut on. I would take it to the grinder. I'm holding it in vice grips very gently, just grind it enough so it's completely flat. Then you back out the nut and the thread is perfect. And you can reinstall it on the bandsaw. This means when you go to tighten it, it's now flat, not sharp. So even if you do have ridges, it's not going to affect the setting. It'll go where it's supposed to be put. You want to go to the trouble and grind off the other piece, the little lips that are there, you can. I just rotated mine 1/6 of a turn. All right, we are reapplying the tension, and we're going past the mark you're supposed to. If I got 1/2 inch here, I'm going a little bit past. If you have a red washer or something on yours that indicates where you're supposed to go, you may have to go past that. And the reason for this is the tension you have to set so that it's going to not have flutter. Now, right now it shouldn't because it's extra tight. And you'll notice I've raised the blade guide quite a bit. Flutter is movement of the blade back and forth as it's traveling. So I'm raising this right up so we can actually see it. And I have to do this while it's going. So you don't want your hands near the blade. All right, we're going to start it. And we're going to look at the blade. And I'm going to back the tension off until you start to see the flutter. Pretty straight there now. There it is. You can start to see it just a little bit, waving back and forth, just slightly. Okay? And we're just going to bring it forward a little bit so the flutter disappears. There it is. And we're going to go one complete revolution beyond that. Shut it off. Now, as we shut it off and it's slowing down, once you change the tension, it is entirely possible you may have to readjust your guide settings on the side and the thrust bearing on the back once more. This is entirely normal, okay, upper and lower. Yes, it's a bit tedious, but it's necessary. You must check it anyway. Got it down to my normal working height for most things. And what you have to realize is that because there is a slight gap between the back of the blade and the thrust bearing in there, you don't want it touching when it's not using material going through the blade, that when you push on it, the blade does move back slightly. So this centering of the blade, when you do set it, to have it just like a 1/16 of an inch or a millimeter towards the front is a good idea, because when you push on it, it then centers itself. The only way to check that is by cutting something to find out if it's tracking properly. Here's a little jig that I've made up to demonstrate what's happening with the bandsaw blade. Okay, this little device here represents the wheel. Okay, the curve of the wheel. This piece on the end is curved. And that's like the surface, the convex surface of the outside of your wheel, where the tire is. Now, the blade comes into contact with this. You can see my fancy blade here. It's got a magnet on the back. And if it's in the middle, okay, it will be parallel to the rest of the fence, and so on. On the back of your bandsaw is an adjustment for the angle of the wheel. And if the wheel is tilted towards the back, and how that happens is the screw is at the bottom on the hinge piece, it pushes in when you tighten it in. So the wheel, I'm exaggerating, is like that. So what's going to happen to the blade if you rotate it? It's going to go towards the back of the wheel. Look what happens. Look at my little dowel down here. It aims this way, okay, across the table. Conversely, if you loosen it, it's under tension, and the wheel is leaning, is backed out like this, and the top is leaning towards the front, the blade will be like this. And it will turn the other way. And this is what is involved with tracking. This is rarely mentioned in many books. This is the most important adjustment that there is. Here is my angle adjustment for the upper wheel. This is just a locking device. This is what you turn. You can see I have a white mark scribed on there. You can have anything that you wish. And I have a piece of tape here. That's to remind me, with this particular blade, where it's supposed to be. So if it gets bumped or somebody's fooling with it, I know there's something wrong. When doing any of the adjustments, don't have the bandsaw going, just turn it by hand like this, and you can visualize it being at the center of the wheel. If you wish to measure to double check, you can do so. Okay, from the front of the tire to the tooth, from the back of the blade to the back of the tire. And if they are almost exactly the same, you're very close. What you have to remember is, though, is when you're adjusting down here, it may change slightly, and we'll talk about that in a minute. The guides for the blade vary from one machine to another. Many older machines just had steel blocks, and they came in and you were supposed to adjust them so they were within roughly a 64th of an inch either side of the blade as you rotated it by hand. The problem with those metal blocks, with a little bit of fluctuation in the blade and while moving wood through there, the blade would rub on the steel blocks, and that reduced the life of your bandsaw blade considerably because they heated up and heated up the bandsaw blade. You can replace those steel blocks, as I did in my school shop for many, many years, with ones from Lee Valley. They're called cool blocks. They're made of phenolic, layers of phenolic, and graphite. And you can have those practically touching your blade. They actually will make the blade run cooler. Won't heat up at all. And if they wear a little bit, you simply take them out and you just sand the ends very slightly, put them back in, and they'll last for years and years and years. I had mine going for 15 years, only ever just sanded them once. Now, and that's with 200 people a week using them. If you look in Lee Valley catalog and you see ones that aren't listed for your particular brand of bandsaw, you can take ones that are larger and just send them down to fit. Very easy to do. On other machines, you have ceramic, you have rollers like I do here, sometimes double rollers, and these have a center screw in them. When you loosen it, you can turn this by hand, and there's an eccentric in there. And what it does, it's off-center, so when you turn it, the actual bearing rolls out, and then turn it the other way, it rolls in. And you have to do one side at a time. You can see I've moved this back. it's moved forward so the bearing is just behind the tooth. Just behind the tooth. Now, you adjust it so that it's within approximately 3/1000 of an inch away from the blade. And they will say, oh, stick in the feeler gauge. No. Stick in 2 feeler gauges. Do both sides, because if you do one, it just pushes the blade over the other side. You must have it so you can put 2 in. Now that your side adjustments are done to about 3/1000 away, the thrust bearing on the back can be moved forward, and it should be about a 64th of an inch behind the blade. And I'm having it touching the blade and just bringing it back a little wee bit. It's hard for you to see, but I can look through the hole here and see it just behind. And then I can temporarily tighten this a little bit. I will rotate the blade, make sure the bearing is not turning. To back it up a bit more. There we go. Okay. Now, it should not be touching the thrust bearing here or down here. This has already been adjusted until you make contact with a piece of wood. Then it just pushes it back ever so slightly. So it's running freely when the bandsaw is idling, as it were. When you're done adjustment now, you have to recheck everything a second time, maybe even a third time. And I'm rotating this by hand, and you'll see occasionally a bearing may turn a little bit, and that's okay, as long as it's not going full time. Same thing on the bottom. And if you're doing the bottom, you'll have to open the lower and turn it down here, otherwise you won't be able to see. Just while we have this open, and you can see a little piece of cardboard here, and a brush, of course. There's another brush there. The brush is to keep the wheel clean. This is a piece of cardboard I have jammed in there. You notice it sticks out? That's how it hits the back of the door over here when it's shut. And the vacuum can suck everything off of here. I've even blocked off my lower dust pickup because this takes everything. We're going to start the bandsaw now, and I'm going to show you a little trick. You can use any stone for this, but I happen to have one that's just a little piece of stone glued to a piece of wood. It's now going, and on the back of the blade, where it's very sharp on the corners, if you can just knock the sharpness off those corners, when you're pushing it through a piece of lumber and you want to turn a little bit of a curve, it won't bind. And you'll see, just on the back, you see it spark a little bit because it's very hard steel. Just the edges. Make sure you don't go near the front. You don't want to do it to the teeth. There we are. All done. Now I'm going to adjust the blade height because I'm going to parallel cut a piece of lumber that I have here. And you don't want it too high. That's safely done. There. Stopped. And this is a machined piece of mahogany. And one edge has a true edge on it, done on the jointer. And I'm going to do a parallel cut with my fence here. Now, I'll start it up. There we get the speed. And holding tight to the fence, my hand is well clear of the blade. A nice steady pressure. It's really important to have a steady pressure. Do not stop and start again, because if you do, the bandsaw may change its track slightly. That's very important, particularly if you're doing something like resawing where it's very thick. Nice steady cut all the way through. Do not stop. Just checking the parallel cut that I made. I had to wait for the bandsaw to stop. And at this end, I'm in metric system here. I am just ever so slightly under 9.2. And at this end, same thing, just a hair under 9.2. So it's cutting parallel. If you want to try it freehand without the fence, you'll have to draw yourself a line and push. Okay? That's a really good way to check for something that's tracking properly. The fence does help, but you can draw a line parallel to the edge, cut, and if it's tracking properly, remember steady pressure is absolutely necessary. Do not stop, start with the pressure all the way through. And if it is going one way or the other ever so slightly, you can adjust, as I demonstrated earlier, with the angle adjustment wheel for the upper wheel. You'll probably find you don't have to do anything. Remember, when finished, you want to take the tension off, so I'm putting my little device in here, so I cannot start the bandsaw, going around the back and taking the tension completely off. That way it's going to save the life of my blade. And I hope you'll tune in to other videos from Wilson's Fine Woodworking.